It's Tuesday, July 12th. Vaccine makers are moving fast, but is COVID moving faster? We start here. Moderna announces new findings on its vaccine, but will it hold up against the variants already sweeping the nation?
We're probably averaging more like 500,000 cases a day.
With officials offering less data on case counts, we'll get a reality check on the pandemic. All forest fires threaten trees, but most trees aren't 2,000 years old.
Crews have set up sprinklers around the sequoias. They've cut lines around them.
Our team is on the front lines of the fire sweeping through Yosemite. And ding dong, there's thousands of protesters at your front door.
And it's time that we got all our stolen money back to this country.
How a mob in Sri Lanka kicked out their president and took over his home for an impromptu pool party. From ABC News, this is Start Here. I'm Brad Milkey. If you look at the CDC's mask guidance map right now to figure out where COVID is really surging, you'd go to the CDC website.
Okay, let's see. CDC COVID guideline map.
And up would come a map featuring green, yellow, and orange counties.
It's green and yellow.
Most counties in the country are considered either low or medium risk. That's the mask guidance. But remember, the CDC's mask guidance now also takes into account how many hospitalizations are happening near you, how many beds are available. Could you get help if you suddenly became desperately ill? But what if you just don't want to get COVID? What if you're nervous about transmission?
Oh, community transmission. You literally have to scroll further down.
Well, when you click on that map,
oh, jeez,
it looks completely different.
It's all red. This is fully red.
We currently live in a country where well over 90% of Americans live in a place that is considered high risk for transmission, meaning you have a very good chance of catching COVID if you're not taking precautions, which is why in recent weeks it feels like everyone's getting it. A big part of the problem is that vaccines were developed for an earlier variant of COVID. They're still effective at preventing severe illness, but when the Omicron variant started circulating, along with all of its subvariants, those vaccines prevented the spread less and less. Well, yesterday, Moderna came out and said it's got a vaccine that may potentially offer more protection against this evolving virus. So when will that vaccine be in your doctor's office? ABC's Ariel Metropolis covers the pandemic full time. And Ariel, before we even go into the vaccine developments, can you just take us on a tour of the country as to where we are with COVID right now?
Sure. So it's tough to know exactly what is happening with COVID because the data is becoming less and less accessible. States aren't reporting how many people are getting COVID or how many people are ending up in the hospital. We don't have that data to tell us what's really happening. But we do hear from our friends, neighbors, that people are testing positive a lot. And it seems like people are getting infected, reinfected more and more again.
What were your symptoms to begin with?
Oh, headache, body aches, fever.
You said your skin hurt.
Yeah, body aches.
So we're still averaging about 100,000 cases a day. But last week, Dr. Ashish Jha from the White House was telling us that we're probably averaging more like 500,000 cases a day because people are testing at home. They're not going out and getting PCR tests anymore. So they'll take their tests at home. Maybe they'll tell their friends and family, but they're not reporting it to their local jurisdictions the vast majority of the time. So we don't really know how many people are really getting COVID right now. Even the hospitalization data, which we used to think of as the gold standard for knowing where we are in the pandemic, it hasn't been updated in more than a week from HHS.
Better safe than sorry. That's what I said. It's a simple thing to put on a mask.
If you talk to people across the country, some people are still passionate about wearing their masks and following precautions, but a lot of people are over it. They don't want to keep wearing their masks or social distancing. They want to live their lives and they don't want COVID to control it anymore.
So with these new variants then, what should we know about that? Like BA4, BA5 are the ones that are currently becoming more and more dominant. Are we seeing differences with them? Do they hit you differently?
So there's a lot we still don't know. It's still pretty early, but we do know that it doesn't appear to cause more severe disease, but it does appear to be more infectious.
Even if you had a previous infection with Omicron or Alpha or Delta, you could be infected with this new variant.
BA5 and BA4 were first discovered in South Africa earlier this year. They saw a big increase in infections, but they didn't see a big increase in hospitalizations and deaths. We also saw a similar surge in Portugal, But what happened there was a little different because they, even though they have a very well vaccinated and boosted population, they saw an increase in hospitalizations and deaths. And that's why we have health officials, the White House, raising alarm bells again, because we don't know the course that it's going to take here in the US. So they want to ensure that people are taking precautionary measures to ensure that they're protected.
Well, so then what happens with this next batch of vaccines? What's needed? What's going to happen?
So Moderna announced yesterday morning that they have new data that shows that their vaccine is better at producing neutralizing antibodies against all current variants, including Omicron and BA.5, than the current vaccine that we have right now. So that current vaccine is based off the original Wuhan strain. So they're hoping that this fall, it will be a better vaccine to combat all those new variants that we're seeing circulating and causing a rise in infections across the country.
How good is it? Originally we were told vaccines, they'll drastically reduce transmission. Can they make those promises about these newest variants even?
The results showed a 6-fold increase in neutralizing antibodies against COVID, but it doesn't tell us the full story. We still don't know how adequately protected we will be in the fall against infection. We believe it's going to be better at protecting against hospitalization and deaths, which is why they keep pushing everybody, particularly the vulnerable, to get boosted.
When those vaccines come out, when will they be available? Will everyone be able to get them? What happens with the rollout?
We believe that these vaccines are going to be available come October or November. And the U.S. government has purchased 105 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine. But that's not enough doses to cover the entire U.S. population.
There is some urgency to figure out the composition of the vaccine for the fall. We don't want to be in a situation where we have a rise in cases ahead of vaccination and we're trying to play catch up.
Right now, that's about enough to cover the highest risk Americans, immunocompromised, older people. But we don't know yet if every American is going to have access to this vaccine. That's still up in the air.
Right, and the fact that it's just a slice of the population that might have access to these vaccines, that is why the White House has said we need more funding from Congress. In the meantime, though, you have health officials pointing out that so many Americans, tens of millions of Americans, have still not gotten their booster shots, have still not even gotten their original vaccine shots. Those, they say, are so crucial to preventing severe illness from these strains right now. Ariel Metropolis, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Brad.
Next up on Start Here, they've survived for thousands of years, but the sequoias of Yosemite might not survive a climate crisis. We're back in a bit.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any place else. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir, America's #1 most watched newscast, now streaming on ABC News Live.
This is ABC News Live.
The crush of families here in Poland.
At refugee centers.
In Putin's Russia.
On the ground in Ukraine.
Close to the front line.
Here at the White House.
Destructive Cat 4 storm.
Here along I-5.
Boston is in the bullseye.
Let's go. We made it.
ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Anytime, anywhere. Streaming 24/7 straight to you for free.
Thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
He thought he was God.
He's now one of the most vilified men in the world. He is the everyman. Zelensky is the Tom Hanks of Ukraine.
The fact that a little nice Jewish boy is 5'7" is showing up this KGB agent in the Kremlin.
What do you say to Americans who see Russia and you not only as a rival, but an unfriendly adversary?
Two men at war.
Which Vladimir will take over. The world is not going to be the same.
I know what happened, and I'm not guilty.
Why the fascination with criminal trials? Figure out what's really out there.
She revealed she had murdered his family.
I know in my heart that he did this.
It's the time of suspicion.
The ending's really tough.
You don't know whether truth is going to be difficult to find unless you try to find it.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
This is a story I wish I never had to tell. It haunts me every day. As a Girl Scout, I never once thought anything bad could happen. But I came to learn what murder was.
3 Girl Scouts were discovered today.
This case is mystery upon mystery.
When I think of those 3 girls, I wonder what's the best way to honor them. That's why I've come back home, to find answers, once and for all.
Elizabeth Holmes found guilty on 4 counts of fraud, facing the possibility of decades in prison. Now, we take you inside the courtroom and behind the scenes. The Dropout, Elizabeth Holmes on Trial. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Just a few weeks ago, floodwaters wiped out huge areas in one of the country's most revered national parks in Yellowstone. Well, flash forward a few weeks later, there is a wildfire working its way toward Yosemite National Park, and one of its most iconic treasures is in the path of destruction. So let's go to ABC's Will Carr, who is there on the fire lines. In fact, traveling between fire lines as we speak. Will, where is this all unfolding? What does it look like where you are?
So, Brad, this is all taking place inside Yosemite National Park. In fact, we are on the front lines. We just jumped into our car here to have this phone call with you. Communication, comms are not great here, but the fire sparked Thursday, and it then has slowly been making its way through the park. The big concern here is how close it's going to get to the sequoias. These are truly national treasures. I've actually seen them for the first time. This is a tree that's over 200 feet tall. It's 2,000 to 3,000 years old, and you walk up to it and you're just awestruck by how beautiful this tree is. So that is the big concern, is just how close this fire is going to get to these amazing trees.
To lose a tree that's 2,000 to 3,000 years old is, you know, every single one of them is precious. So I'd cry a tear over every tree.
Crews have set up sprinklers around the sequoias. They've cut lines around them. They've been able to up the containment on this fire, but the big concern is just how close these flames could get to the sequoias.
Wait, do sprinklers have a chance? Like, I get that, you know, it's water, but do sprinklers have a serious chance of protecting against a fire this big?
So the idea is that you would dampen the surrounding area, but then also the benefit of sprinklers is you increase the humidity in the air, and that also helps tamp down the flames. So far it's working. The flames have gotten up to some sequoias, but fire crews were able to jump on top of those very quickly, and they feel pretty confident here on the front lines.
We have our crews had come out here and turn it all on and really got this a nice soak. So we're pretty confident that if the fire comes in, we have a good defense here.
They have a hold of this. Like I said, the containment numbers just continue to go up. And at this point, they're letting the fire sort of burn off into an area that is very rugged and rural and works for them.
It's going to get hotter and more humid. So that is something that could cause this fire to increase in intensity.
The good news is that the winds are going to be pretty low the rest of the week here. So fire crews are trying to take advantage of that. The problem is you're looking at destructively dry conditions here. So it really does not take much for a fire like this to make a run because it is so dry. These are perfect fuels for a fire of this size. So while they have the winds in their favor, you know, the dry conditions really are not great.
Well, yeah, and I'm trying to figure out how regular these types of wildfires are becoming, because in some cases it seems like it's not unheard of, but you're seeing several of these types of events back to back to back.
Totally. So fires in this area are not uncommon. And in fact, they're normal. They're part of Mother Nature's cycle. What we're seeing, though, is that these fires are burning hotter. They're burning faster. In a lot of cases, the winds are stronger.
This has been a very active fire. There's a lot of fuels on the ground, and they're very dry, and they're burning, and they're kicking up a lot of heat and smoke.
And these fires can create their own weather patterns. So at one point over the past 48 hours, tree limbs were quite literally, because of the winds that were generated by the fire here, they were shooting up into the air hundreds of feet. You had planes and helicopters that were swooping down into the area that were making retardant and water drops. Well, one of those planes narrowly missed a tree branch that shot up into the air.
Hey, just want to let you know a branch went right over the top of us, pretty good size, probably 50 feet above us coming down.
And you could hear the pilot saying, "We got to get out of here."
The shot up towards the plane? The branches from the ground were making their way towards the plane?
A tree limb shoots up hundreds of feet into the air, barely misses the plane. And those are the conditions that they're dealing with here. So they actually said, we have to pull back because this is dangerous.
If we keep seeing that, we might have to knock it off. I don't want to take a chance of busting a window in an airplane or hurting an aircraft for this.
And then obviously the fire continues to grow because you don't have the air support to try to suppress the flames.
Unbelievable stuff. Will Carr there in the midst of it all as firefighters try to protect Yosemite National Park. Thanks so much, Will.
You bet. Thanks, Brad.
As much of the world was in disbelief over the assassination of the former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the South Asian country of Sri Lanka was watching its own leader literally forced out of his home by an angry mob. Sri Lanka, of course, a huge island just off the coast of India. More than 20 million people live there. And over the last several months, they have become increasingly angry with their government, to the point where on Friday, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was told by his security team to flee his home ahead of some big protests. That was Friday. Well, by Saturday evening, protesters had forced their way past police into his residence, where they took over the roof, the rooms, even the pool. And as of this morning, he says he will be stepping down. So, how did this happen, and where does this leave a country that was already deep in a crisis before this? Saloni Shah is a food and agriculture analyst at the Breakthrough Institute. They're a think tank that focuses on the intersection of technology, the economy, and the environment. Well, before these protests had really taken off, Saloni was writing about the origins of this crisis. So with that, could you give us a sense of how widespread these protests were and how they ended up with people like hanging out in the president's pool?
Absolutely. You have a worsening economic and humanitarian situation, which led to the eruption of massive protests back in March.
The people wanted to protest, but the government is scared of the people.
People were relentlessly protesting for the past several months, and these were widespread protests.
Thousands of people have come to Colombo from many parts of the island.
Over the weekend, you saw protests escalating to a breaking point. People were pouring into the streets, confronting police. They've managed to overpower the police and get into the president's official residence. And we saw these striking images of people ransacking the president's room, swimming in his pool.
And it's time that we got all our stolen money back to this country.
And they really took his home over.
And also the air conditions are running in that presidential palace while people don't have electricity in their homes.
They've been increasingly upset with the food shortages and the worsening crisis in the country.
Yeah, can you describe how all this kind of started, what the underlying causes for this kind of revolution were?
This is a tiny island nation that used to have a comfortable middle class. They had reached upper middle income status a few years ago. But under the Rajapaksa ruling family, the government squandered the country's economy and financial potential. The decades of financial mismanagement and corruption, large tax cuts, a binge of infrastructure spending that yielded low profits kind of are part of the economic backdrop of what's been going on. But then you have the pandemic, which hit back in 2020 and devastated the country's tourist sector, which is a key source of revenue for the government, which the country uses to buy food and gas and, critical and necessary medical supplies. And so without tourist dollars, the country began looking for ways to cut costs. In April of last year, the government passed an unusual ban on fertilizers and pesticides, along with other import restrictions.
Really, fertilizer, as I would not think of that as like the thing that would start a crisis.
Absolutely. People don't think of fertilizer as something that would start a crisis. But in fact, 75% of farmers in the country are dependent on fertilizers for key crops like tea and rice. These two crops are really important for both the economy and supporting people's livelihoods, but also food self-sufficiency for a tiny country.
That is not what we wanted, what the people wanted, what the future generation, the future of Sri Lanka wanted. They wanted a complete change.
There's hardly any money to import gas, cooking oil, food, toilet paper even.
What we get from our as salaries, it's only worth for like a 2-3 weeks time.
Previously middle-class people are foregoing meals because of severe food shortages. Grocery stores are rationing produce because there's not enough. And so agriculture in some ways is that backbone, that last sort of defense against this worsening situation that they're dealing with. And they were projected to save $400 million by cutting the foreign fertilizer purchases. However, they had to import $450 million worth of rice on top of the subsidies for farmers that had suffered crop losses on top of this worsening economic situation. And there's just a complete breakdown of trust. And so back in March, you saw people protesting, calling for the resignation for former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and he's finally resigned after they've stormed his official residence.
I was going to say, what's next for these leaders? Like, for a while, he was like hanging out on like a naval vessel off the coast. Like, what happens next for anyone who tries to step in and govern the country here?
Because of the enormous breakdown in trust, it's going to be really hard for, that trust to be built back up. And it's going to be really difficult to bring this country out of the financial ruin that it is in. And so it's going to require, in some ways, a restoration of democracy from the decades of corruption that this family has brought on. The country needs $6 billion to stay afloat. And so you're going to need courageous leaders that are committed to democracy, that are committed to evidence-based policymaking to do right by their people.
Just unbelievable images to see this kind of build from an agricultural crisis to a full-blown economic crisis to then people taking over the residences of multiple leaders, including the Prime Minister. Saloni Shah from the Breakthrough Institute. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, one more quick break. When we come back, you thought sepia photographs were old? Well, you're not ready for what NASA just spotted. One Last Thing is next.
Zoo! 200!
Oh, 200.
200 episodes of Dr. Pol. Oh. Music to my ears.
It's been 10 years, and I'm still having fun.
That rocks. He's got the moves that make your animals groove.
Now we do the dance of joy. Yay!
He's like the Justin Bieber of the
Headlining the hottest barns.
Shout out.
It's a show you won't want to miss.
I'm not going to be here forever. Maybe.
The Incredible Dr. Pol. New season Saturday, July 16th at 9 on Nat Geo Wild.
You never know what you're going to get on this show. That's all I'm going to tell you.
Yes, Whoopi! This mic on? Can you hear me out there?
Behind the scenes is always a better show.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's what people don't see during the commercial break.
Right, they don't.
What happened?
I had no idea really what I was getting myself into.
That day that we walked out, I treasure that day.
I couldn't sit there.
You're doing good, Joy. You're doing good. Oh, yeah, baby.
It was crazy.
Behind the Table. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news, free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
National parks are incredibly safe places. A crime will happen.
Hey, my wife had fallen. She's in really critical condition.
At that time, I thought it was just a tragic accident.
There's still a lot of questions we need to ask.
There were small things that didn't totally add up.
This is 2 lives for Harold that have died now. I was shocked. Something's not right.
He conned his way through love and the wedding of a lifetime.
He was a rock star surgeon.
That George Clooney type of feel, sexy.
But now, the con is up with a shocking verdict just in 2020, Friday night on ABC.
And one last thing. We've all seen pictures of stars from telescopes, but we've never seen photos like these.
Light from the oldest galaxies, the oldest documented light in the history of the universe.
Yesterday at the White House, President Biden invited NASA scientists to reveal the first full-color images from the new James Webb telescope.
There are billions of galaxies with billions of stars and suns,
and we're getting our first glimpse.
This photo looks like you might expect a space photo to look like. It's a black night sky with hundreds of specks of light. But some of these specks are 4.6 billion years old. That's how long it took that light to reach us, and it's the farthest we've ever looked into our universe. You probably know the Hubble telescope sits in space in our orbit, takes pictures by keeping its lens open, sometimes for weeks at a time. Webb was launched late last year to succeed Hubble, and with its huge golden mirrors and its ability to see infrared wavelength, it only takes a fraction of the time to look way deeper into space.
And when you look at something as big as this is, we are going to be able to answer questions that we don't even know what the questions are yet.
And so what we saw yesterday are clusters of galaxies that formed shortly after the Big Bang. Later today, we'll see more images. This was just a teaser. And what else is there to see? Well, experts say this telescope will not only be able to watch stars, but tell us more about how they formed.
Because of the chemical composition that we can determine with this telescope of their atmosphere, if those planets are habitable.
By looking at these interstellar time capsules, we'll be able to see black holes in mid-creation, solar systems being made, and even search for clearer markers of life on some of these faraway planets. And if this just one image seems awe-inspiring, how many worlds are inside of it, consider this. NASA says, imagine you're lying on a beach, you hold up a single grain of sand to the sky, hold it an arm's length away. That tiny grain of sand is the size of the slice of the sky represented in this photo. There are many more to come. Absolutely incredible. And like I said, more on the way. So you can check out these photos on abcnews.com. The ABC News app will be streaming some of this later today. Also, Start Here is on Instagram. Check us out at Start Here ABC. I'm Brad Milkey. See you tomorrow.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?